All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Jake Wyman with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Welcome to this week's edition of Capital Clarity, where we are taking a look at something many other state legislators are considering this year: state sovereignty. After the last 4 years of abject failure by the Biden administration, from the crisis at the border to botched responses for natural disasters, we must ask ourselves, what do we do when the federal government fails us? For too long, states have relied on the federal government and their dollars when we have the power to act. We can take care of our own laws, our own lands, and our own people. And after seeing how quickly and effectively this current administration is at getting things done, Idaho can surely do the same thing. Our first guest can truly speak to that. Representative Josh Tanner spearheaded House Concurrent Resolution 5, which declares Anthony Fauci's federal pardon does not apply to any potential indictments here in the state of Idaho. Yeah. His focus, which is stopping our heavy reliance on federal dollars, is something the IFF has championed for years, and something that is desperately needed to bring about change here in the Gem State. Please welcome Representative Josh Tanner.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Guess we'll start out with the Fauci thing because, for one, it's interesting if you can actually get a preemptive pardon because pardons are actually done post you've actually been charged for something. So, one, I'm not sure Biden actually thought through much of anything during his presidency, nor did he think about the piece of paper he was signing when that was brought forward. But beyond that, I think it's important for people to actually understand what our power is of a state and what we have authority over and what the federal government has authority over. This has been the fight that actually got us our independence and state sovereignty. I mean, that is what our founders actually fought for, was our state sovereignty, was fighting for our own independence. Even within that, you saw a massive divide within our founding fathers between an actual state sovereignty. One was a federalist group, one was an anti-federalist group. I would imagine most people in this room would be the anti-federalist group, which so would I. Again, it was the concern that the federal government, a federal one dominant power, would dominate over the states and take control over them. And what you're seeing is that their fear was realistic. Some of the people in there, like George Mason, which was one of the few founders that didn't sign the Constitution. There was a few that actually didn't sign it. That were our founders that actually were delegates that were there, and they wouldn't sign it because they wouldn't put the amendments to the Constitution in when they were originally doing the Constitutions. Now, shortly after, we did get the amendments. Obviously, the 10th Amendment is the one that really deals with our state sovereignty. But beyond that, we're just seeing the erosion that has been going on year after year, decade after decade, since our founders actually founded, which was the erosion of state sovereignty, state authority. And they're doing it through, mostly at this point in time, it's through money. One, when Idaho became a state, there's a lot of Idahoans that didn't want our federal land. I think Cornel is going to actually talk a little bit more on the federal land and state land piece, Representative Rasor. But within that, the money is where the big rub happens within federal government and state government. So they take our money, and it's just our money because it's our left pocket, not our right pocket that they're taking it from. But they give it back to the states. What do they give back to the states for? They give it back to the states for control. They don't just say, here, we want you to go manage some of these programs the best way you can. They give it to us and they say, but you have to follow every one of our rules, every one of our control. And if you want it, you only have to pay a little bit, but we'll give you a lot, but you don't get any say in it. And that's where we've really seen a massive failure, especially within the state of Idaho. I know that's something that from IFF, Nick Kloss, as well as Fred Birnbaum, has fought within JFAC and within our state budgeting process. What are the amount of federal dollars that came in? We saw a lot of it come in just recently with the ARPA money. Again, it was Biden's disaster. Build government bigger is all he's done with that. It didn't actually really get a chance to go out to people. It literally just grew government to the nth. And there were very few of us that were down there in the side of more of the state sovereignty going, we do not want this. This is going to lead to a disaster as a state. This is going to put us in a place where we can't actually afford. And what we're seeing currently is we saw Trump come in, which I mean everybody should applaud that one because that was probably the biggest thing, the biggest change that our country is going to see that's happened in a long time. I think he was more prepared this election cycle by a long shot. At least he had about 10 times the executive orders prepared than he did last time. But we're seeing a lot on programs, on a lot of the federal money. I know even within Medicaid here within the state of Idaho, the screen went black for a little bit. It was shut down when he signed that executive order, and they actually went ahead and they allowed certain ones to kind of come back online to continue some of those things. And our state was trying to figure out what do we do? What because we don't actually have the money. It's their money. I mean, this is borrowed money in a sense that we're actually spending at this point in time for some of these programs. And they said, well, we'll just spend the money we have and then we'll stop it and say it's on the hospitals. And I think it's going to take something like that to where you're just going to have somebody like President Trump that will just shut down these programs to actually deal with it. It's making it easier for me within JFAC to go through because one of the initiatives was a DEI aspect. Again, this was not something that was brought on by the state of Idaho. We aren't the ones pushing out the DEI. Most of the DEI that's within the state of Idaho is actually being pushed down upon us. That is where I'm actually the most frustrating thing for me is that we are just now fighting back, trying to get rid of something that wasn't what we put into any of our bills, but it was within all of the federal money that was actually coming down. You saw the one, I mean, I did introduce the bill that dealt with Medicaid expansion, to remove Medicaid expansion. Again, we have a trigger bill that's coming after that, that came shortly after that. And what we really want within any of those programs is state control. The federal government just gives us the one lever to shut off or turn on. When there's portions of things that actually could be helpful for the state, and we want those little levers. We want pharmaceuticals, it's an on or off thing. We want adult dental, it's an on or off thing. We don't have the ability to actually give any type of controls, and that's what I'm really hoping the President Trump actually allows and gives that state sovereignty back, because it's our money in the end that they're actually taking. States were the ones that allowed them actually to get the money in the first place. We were the ones that said, yes, you can tax us. And within that, then they kept taxing us. They don't have a balanced budget. So I'm hoping at some point in time, Congress realizes that we have to actually have a balanced budget and force upon that. You're seeing Trump. That's one of the things Trump is actually talking about. He's also talking about term limits aspects and trying to force Congress to actually deal with some of the problems that we've seen for a very long time. And that is we're now seeing within just the Doge. We've just in the last few days, we're starting to see stuff where we've spent $1 million in a pillow fluffing, which I don't understand how somebody even snuck that one in there. I mean, I got that Nancy Pelosi snuck in the rehabilitation for red belly rats into San Francisco because that's just what her constituents are, and she thought she was just helping out her constituents. But within that, we've got one that just for like elevator music. There's an entire administration. We're spending millions of dollars every single year just on elevator music. The type of stuff that we are wasting our hard-earned tax money on and our grandkids' futures on is just beyond ridiculous at this point in time. So the idea is to try to get control of that from a federal level, but it is really the state's problem is we actually have the power. We have the authority. We have the sword. We just can't figure out how to get that sword out of its sheath. We are literally, it's like, how does this actually work? There's very few of us that are like, we're the ones with the power. We just need to enforce that power. We need to tell the federal government, no, we are not doing this. No, we are not listening to you. No, we are not going to abide by your rules. We actually have state authority, and then we actually have a good attorney general that can actually stand and fight for us. And I think that's where everybody gets nervous. One, they get nervous about the fights. They get nervous that it's going to cost us money. Well, if it's either going to cost us a little bit of money right now, or it's going to cost us our children's futures down the road. So we might as well put the fight and make Idaho the stand that we actually want it to be. Most people that are in Idaho anymore, we've seen a massive growth in Idaho. People came to Idaho because Idaho was not a shy state. Idaho wanted to stand up, wanted to stand strong. We've had people a long time. People in this room that have been here for a long time actually standing and fighting for Idaho. And there's more and more people coming on, and that's why people are coming to Idaho, is because they see that as we're the beacon of light. We're the potential chance of hope to try to stand back and push back on this. Now, I will tell you the bad news that we're over 40% of our budgets still within the federal government. We still have a mass amount. They still have a mass amount of control in there. We still have programs that we have in place that are growing at a dollar amount that is higher than our current revenue aspect. But within that, the only way we actually can get that sovereignty back as a state is by telling the federal government no on these programs and dealing with consequences of. I mean, there will be fallback from what we do. When we say no to Medicaid expansion, I mean, it's everybody's going to go. We just shove it to the hospitals, which is not necessarily the truth. Honestly, where we should be shoving it to is to the churches. The churches were there to actually help the people out. That is one of their missions of a church. It's the reason that they are the nonprofits. That's the reason that they are exempt from property taxes. And we help a lot of people all across the country, but we don't do a very good job of helping our neighbors. And if we would actually put that as an initiative within our churches, we would actually have, again, a way to gain some state sovereignty back. Well, thank you. But I'd say beyond that, I'd say we struggle. Our biggest overall struggle has not been with the federal government. It is actually probably within the state of Idaho. And it is a frustrating thing. I mean, we see this happen on a daily basis of the people that we elect to bring into this building, that everybody has different ideas. Every part of our state has different ideas. We have places throughout the state that have places like INL. Again, those are federal funds. A lot of people are really pro education. I'm pro education. I'm just not pro indoctrination. And but we're still stuck in this realm where it's like it's one or the other. It's women's rights, but not the kids' rights. I mean, we're constantly stuck in this. We've been put ourselves in this realm of like where we don't understand the two differences of the things going on. When realistically, it really is a simple solution. We just keep making it a complicated issue. So I'd say the one thing I can tell everybody that we probably need to do more than anything else is to actually just stand up for what we actually believe in and just say, this is where I stand. This is where I want to believe. And it's not to say that I'm going to go fight from that point forward. I'm going to go educate from that point forward, because Republicans are notorious for it. Like, we want to go fight. I actually like fighting. I think it's actually a lot of fun. I like poking at the Democrats. I like teasing people. It gives me enjoyment. My wife is actually here, my beautiful wife that allows me to do this, sitting back there drinking coffee in a room that she's not supposed to have drinks in. But she can contest. I actually like to fight, but part of this is we've got to figure out a way to not just fight with somebody just to be angry at them. You have to be able to fight in a way that's actually moving the ball forward, that's actually waking them up for what it is you're trying to actually explain to them, instead of just the evilness of like, you're a bad person, I'm going to fight you for no apparent reason, and you're a Democrat and I hate you. That will never work. That is the divide within our country that is continually happening. Our media pushes it. There are organizations all across the country that push this, and they like that division. They like that fight. They like that divide. We don't actually gain very much from that. We actually gain division from that. And we do have to figure out, we are a country of immigrants. We are a country of misfits. We are a country of people that just see differently. And that's okay. It's not bad that we do, but our job as conservatives, our job as the people that really should sit in this building, are here to fight for people, to gain the ground that we actually want to gain, to make people aware of the actual issues in a way that is the non-confrontational issues. Because it shouldn't be that confrontational. Democrats, I watch them on a continually basis. That's the Democrats' idea, confrontation. They want to twist an issue around. Let us not do that. Let us be the ones that actually hold on sovereign, like, solid ground. One, we actually usually have God on our side. We have the word that tells us this is the line. There's nothing that we're going to try to do that goes beyond that. Like, we are just saying this is what we believe. And there is reasons and facts for what we actually are doing and what we believe. And that was ingrained within the Constitution. I think I'm getting off of state sovereignty a little bit, but we'll bring state sovereignty back. Again, the biggest issue within the state is money. The biggest issue that the federal government has control is with money. Lands is another big issue within it, but it is, you look even with the lands aspect, they allow our forests to burn, they allow them to be unmanaged, and yet for some reason we can't go fight the fires. That's wrong. We can go fight the fires. We just go do it. What are they going to do to us? Tell us we're in trouble? Like, no. And that's where we make sure we actually are directing our state agencies. Now, will they not pay us back? Probably. Can we sue the federal government? We can, and we do often. And most of the time, when you actually see the states that actually stand up and fight against the federal government, normally the states actually do win. I mean, we do have the Constitution on our side. We do have certain aspects of on our side. Now it becomes on the legal aspect of things. So you have the preemptive articles for the Constitution that actually talk about who has the authority when it comes to the legal aspect. Legal aspect, actually, it says the larger one actually has the aspect, but if you read down further, it actually goes into more detail where it's not necessarily the case. They can set a precedent on something, we can actually fill in all the blanks. And that's where we forget to fill in all the blanks. We forget to actually put in, if the FDA says that they require labeling, that's great. We actually get to say what goes on the labeling. We can actually say what lists out something that's actually on there. We don't have to wait for the federal government to actually tell us what to do, but we keep waiting for them to actually tell us, and then we go fight. Instead of taking the action to actually be a sovereign state, to pull that sword out of our sheath and actually be the ones to lead the charge. And I think that is what we should be pushing every one of our representatives for, every one of our senators for, being that bold person, not the violent, not the aggressor person, but just the person that actually stands there and says, this is what we want as a state, and this is where we are. So I'm happy to stand for any questions, but I want to make sure I give Representative Rasor the opportunity to come speak as well. So.
Give it up once again for Representative Josh Fauci Hunter Cannon. So, our next speaker is Representative Cornel Rasor, a first-time representative in my district encompassing Bonner and Boundary County. Representative Rasor's top focus is reclaiming federal lands to allow the state of Idaho to manage them. In the wake of the Lava Ridge project, where the federal government almost imposed a wind farm spanning hundreds of acres against the will of the locals, taking control of our lands couldn't be a higher priority. Please welcome Representative Cornel Rasor.
All right, you said I had a clicker. I want to get that ugly face off of there. Can I just press the button? Where'd you go? And what do I aim it at? That? Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm going to give you a 20,000-foot view of Idaho's public lands. They're not federal lands. We've got to start using proper nomenclature. The federal government does not give you the right to carry arms. You were born with that right, and the federal government is supposed to ensure that right, and that Second Amendment is there to remind us to tell them, this is ours, make sure you insure it. So same thing, they are not federal lands. They are currently state lands held in poor escrow by the federal government. And so to start out with, everybody knows the 63%, that Idaho is 61, 62, 63, depending on what part of the encyclopedia you read it. But to put it in perspective, Idaho has a tract of land the size of Arkansas that is off limits, 52,000 square miles. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of things, and this is normally an hour and 45-minute presentation. I'm going to try and blast through it in 40 minutes here. So put your seatbelts on. This is one of the representations. So just under 51,000 or about 33 million acres. And there I am again. That was awful. So how many of you are familiar with the resolution of 1780? Okay, so we've got a couple. Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution says, I know I can't wander around. I normally wander around. All debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be as valid against the United States under the Constitution as under the Confederation. So every article, every resolution that was adopted under the Confederation of States is active and effective under the U.S. Constitution unless it was repealed. And you were going to print me out do I have that? Yeah, I do. So the reason I look like I'm not ready is because I'm not. Let me set this down. Part of the resolution says, resolve that the unappropriated lands that may be ceded or relinquished to the United States by any particular states pursuant to the recommendation of Congress on the 6th day of September last shall be disposed of for the common benefit of the United States and be settled and formed into distinct republican states, which shall become members of the federal union and have the same rights of sovereignty, freedom, and independence as the other states. Under the current Constitution, that resolution is still in effect. And until Colorado, the federal government followed that edict. So if you go back here, look at the states. Look at the federal lands in all the eastern states, east of Colorado, the Dakotas and east, and we'll talk about those when we get to them. Little bits of federal land in them, and mostly Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 says that Congress shall have jurisdiction over Washington, D.C., essentially. Sorry, it's just a slip of the tongue. So consequently, anything that the federal government wanted to use later on, after a state had been ceded its territory, they're supposed to buy it back. That's listed as well. So that was the resolution of 1780. I'm not going to go through it in detail. I have a copy of it. I can send you a copy. But basically, it just says that it was a federal trust obligating the United States to extinguish their governmental, remember that word, extinguish. Kind of like I'm extinguished or distinguished, something. To extinguish their governmental jurisdiction entitled to lands that achieve statehood. A state was required to come up with a constitution or an enabling act, enough population, and a capital city, and at that point they could petition Congress to become a state. And then Congress would follow through with a particular procedure to do that. Every state was supposed to be entered into the Union or brought into the Union on an equal footing. The admission of new states shall be on an equal footing with the original states in all respects, whatever. Now, what do you think the word all means? No, you silly people. Some is what it means. Look in the government thesaurus. It means all. First, in a single republic, oh yeah, that'll be good. First, in a single republic, Madison said, all the power surrendered by the people is submitted to the administration of a single government, and the usurpations are guarded against by a division of the government into distinct and separate departments. In the compound Republic of America, the power surrendered by the people is first divided between two distinct governments, and then the portion allotted to each subdivided among distinct and separate departments. Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other. At the same time, each will be controlled by itself. How do you think we're doing at controlling our federal Leviathan? And what Josh said earlier, if we went in and fought those fires, what are they going to do? Send in F-15s? I don't think so. So we're going to move on to the next page. How's this worked out for us? So this is what the 12 western states look like compared to the 38 eastern states. If you look at the red in the west, that is land controlled by the federal. Those are state lands that are currently controlled by the federal government. In the east, same thing. State lands are controlled, far smaller. Article 1, Section 8, Clause, and I always steal my own thunder. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may, by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. They must have a lot of dockyards and other needful buildings in Idaho, is all I can say, for all that red. Now, this makes sense. On California's admission to the Union, she became owner of all the public land not disposed of by law of Congress. Remember that word disposed. Remember the word extinguished. We're going to talk about those later on. And then in 1976, the Federal Land Management Policy Act simply decided that they would stop doing that by decree, FLIPMA. Title 43 carries most of the information. In Title 43 is also a procedure called coordination. How many of you are familiar with coordination? Okay. When I was a county commissioner in Bonner County, really quickly, we used coordination to stop U.S. Fish and Wildlife from commandeering 376,000 acres of, quote, critical habitat for the mountain caribou in Bonner and Boundary counties. I don't want to get into that too much. It was a 2-year battle, and we coordinated with the Fish and Wildlife and got it stopped. But basically, the statistics, all of you are familiar with the concept that statistics can be used. They can be misused. What was it Mark Twain said? There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And so what happened was, the statistic was that the mountain caribou herd had increased 25%. The percent was correct. They went from 3 to 4 in Boundary County. I know, I was there. Anyway, back to this. So it is the policy of the United States that the public lands be retained in federal ownership. Well, I contest that word ownership, but control. They're definitely controlling them. This violated the resolution of 1780, and it violated the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. After a territory becomes a state, upon return of the lands to the state, if the federal government needs those lands, they must purchase them back if the state legislature consents to the purchase. That has not happened. So it's been done before. Look at the 1850 map. You see the Illinois, Indiana, Missouri. Missouri was 90% federal before 1850. And then they fought this same kind of battle, tooth and nail, for the very same reasons. Look at the things that they were concerned about. They couldn't adequately fund education. Is anybody in here from Custer County? 97% federal. 3% of the land is what the county there has to use to assess for roads, for sanitation, for all the things that counties do. 3% of the land. That's all they've got. 97% of it is controlled by the Fed. Bonner County is 44%. Boundary County, I'm going to get these wrong. We'll look at Boundary County here in a little bit. But basically, most of the state of Idaho, each county has its own section that is controlled by the federal government. And the federal government pays each of those counties a stipend, payment in lieu of taxes, PILT, and Secure Rural Schools, SRS. And those two funds were established several decades ago when the federal government said something like this: they're going to want that land back. We better pay them for keeping it. Let's give them a pittance. They'll never know the difference. I think that's what they said. But it's probably not exactly what they said. But they do pay you a pittance. Does anybody know what you get per acre for having the federal government pay you to keep yourself, to stay off the land? We'll look at Boundary County. Whenever, I've actually got the numbers, so you know.
I heard Lincoln County gets $1 million.
Yeah, I'm sure they do, but divide that by the number of acres and then say to yourself, I wonder if a carefully crafted land use program, including foresters and mining and grazing, could make more than $1.80 an acre. Probably not if I was running it, because I'm not a very good businessman. But so states can't adequately fund their education. They can't grow their economies properly. They can't responsibly manage their abundant resources. This is what Missouri, Illinois, Arkansas, Louisiana, those states were saying back in the 1840s. They didn't have the money to fund their schools. They had no place to put population. Their suffrage rights were being abrogated because there was no place to put people. And you'll see a lot of counties are struggling with land. They've got so little land that they've got people moving in, and nobody wants them there, but they're there. And now they've got to come up with land use policies that will manage the small amount of land they've been allowed to use. Another further concern noted is that the states, so controlled, had less property for citizens to settle on. So I just mentioned this, so it limited their suffrage in the House of Representatives and further constrained them from being able to provide services at the county level. That's what they were complaining about 150 75 years ago? Yeah, 175 years ago. And that's what's happening to us. So it's been done. Now, you've heard it said, I don't know, a former state elected official used to always say, but Idaho's constitution says that we forever disclaimed use of those lands. Have you heard that? Forever disclaimed use of the unappropriated lands. The Idaho's 1890 Constitution actually says that. But it's kind of like when you read Matthew chapter 7, judge not. That's only what you get if you read the first verse. But if you read the rest of the chapter, you find out, oh, you were supposed to judge righteous judgment. And you read later on, we're supposed to judge ourselves. We're supposed to judge the churches. We're supposed to. So that is a hermeneutic, if you will, of considerably smaller scope than the founders intended. Alabama, this is what's in their enabling act, that the people inhabiting the said territory do agree and declare that they forever disclaim all right and title to the waste or unappropriated lands lying within said territory, and that the same shall be and remain at the sole and entire disposition of the United States. Alabama was about 2% federal. Prior to the extinguishment of title of lands that had no federal consideration, Alabama was much more federal land when they first became a state. So Louisiana said that the people inhabiting the said territory do agree and declare that they forever disclaim all right or title to the waste or unappropriated lands lying within said territory, and that the same shall be and remain at the sole and entire disposition of the United States. Now they're 4.6% federal. Nebraska, I won't read it all. They were quite a bit federal. Now they're 1%. North Dakota, 3.9. South Dakota, 5.4. So now let's look at Washington State's Enabling Act. Second, the bottom paragraph, that the people inhabiting said proposed states. So now this was going to be North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington. 4 states this Enabling Act was involved with. Do agree and declare that they forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands lying within the boundaries thereof, and to all lands lying within the said limits, owned or held by any Indian or Indian tribes, and that until the title thereto shall have been extinguished. Look at that in bold. What does it mean to extinguish? Is there a realtor in here, a lawyer? What does it mean to extinguish title on something? Excuse me? You get rid of it. You discover who actually owns it, or who is purchasing it, or whatever the transaction is going to be, and you forfeit your title to someone else. You extinguish your title. That's in Washington's. It wasn't in Alabama's. It wasn't in Louisiana's. I believe it was in Nebraska's and was in the Dakotas. But so until title shall have been extinguished. The purpose of that section of the Enabling Act was to put into law that until the federal government figures out which lands belong to the Indian tribes, which lands are underneath federal installations and need to remain under their control, and any other appropriated lands that are supposed to remain under federal control, till they figure out all of those during the changing of this from a territory to a state, those will remain out of the reach of the state. Once the federal government figured out what to do with each of those lands and extinguished title on them, the remaining lands were given back to the state where they belong. And that's what happened in the East. Here's the Constitution of the state of Idaho. And the people of the state of Idaho do agree and declare that we forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands lying within the boundaries thereof, and to all lands lying within said limits owned or held by any Indians or Indian tribes, and until the title thereto shall have been extinguished by the United States, the same shall be subject to the disposition of the United States, and said Indian lands shall remain under the absolute jurisdiction and control of the Congress of the United States. Well, what happened? They ignored it. They just plain ignored it. The lands, the title would have been extinguished, but the federal government never gave those lands back. Then that was right at the beginning of the progressive, what was called lovingly the progressive era, from the late 1890s till the time of just after Woodrow Wilson. And so that part of the Constitution of the state of Idaho has been quoted ad infinitum, ad nauseum, up to that we disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands. I reminded this particular official one time, you need to read the whole thing, and you'll find out what it actually means. There it is. Okay, you can't read these little numbers. This was, I did my own PowerPoints, and I was learning when I did these. So some of these are really old, but I want to get to this one. So this is the federal acreage in the 12 western states by percentage and by square miles. Nevada has the highest percentage, followed by, I think I did it in order of percentage, yeah. Nevada, followed by Utah, Alaska. Idaho has the fourth highest percentage of federally controlled lands in the entire United States, in all 50 states. So there's 581 million, almost 582 million acres of land under federal control in the western states, in the 12 western states. That seems out of proportion to me, doesn't it to you? Boundary County. This is when I did, so what I would do is when I did these presentations, I would do that particular county's numbers so that they would be aghast at what they were being paid. I remember when I went to Ponderay County in eastern Washington, and I presented the numbers, a couple of people went, no! And I went, well, look it up. And as I mentioned to a couple of people here, I get these numbers that I'm going to show you from the Forest Service and BLM's websites so that they can never say, I cherry-picked the numbers. These are the numbers that they give for what they pay the western states to not use their land. Boundary County is 61% federal, 13.2 state, 25.6 private, and 2% city county. So here's what their numbers look like. They get big checks. Their check for 2020, what year was that? 2023 was $1,031,000 for SRS and $816,000 for PILT. Average works out to $2.49 an acre. So big number, very small percentage. Do you think that the people in Boundary County, the foresters, the county workers, the people who have lived off the land all their lives, could figure out a way to manage that land and make more than $2.49 an acre without raping it and pillaging it with just grazing fees and mining fees and royalties and careful? It has been said that 400 million board feet a year dies in the Panhandle National Forest. We've got 3.4 million acres of forest in the Panhandle, and we lose so much of it to blow down and disease and weather, if you will. If they would just allow us, why am I saying it that way? If we would just go in and manage it, how many jobs would that create? I'm not going to have time to get through all the idea of job creation, but I think those of you who have been entrepreneurs, you can kind of imagine. And here's one thing to remember about jobs. When you create a retail job, that spins off a couple of things. It'll spin off someone who's going to fix your clothes and your tires and your car for driving to and from work. But when you create a manufacturing job, manufacturing jobs are the basis for everything else. What springs out of them, hundreds of sub-jobs. Is that a term? It is now. Hundreds of subcategories of employment. All the things that go along with the loggers and the miners and some of the other manufacturing jobs. I'm having a brain lock because I'm old. So now what happens when Idaho gets her land back? Her land. Better management reduces fire hazard and creates jobs in forestry and related industries. The federal government is relieved of a massive cost of management with no concomitant income. They're not making money on these lands. If we have time, I'm going to be okay, I think. We'll go through some of the comparisons of state land managership versus federal land managership. Basically, what happens is the federal government loses 73 cents for every dollar it invests. And the different states that invest in their lands, the endowment lands, Idaho, New Mexico's got a stellar record, Montana and other states, they average, I think it's $15 for every dollar they invest, but we'll get to it if I make it. Forestry jobs and related industries begin to increase. This is not going to change things overnight, by the way. It takes time to spin up a manufacturing base. We used to have 13 mills in Bonner County. We have 2 now. And we're not allowed to manage the land. We're not allowed to do anything. When we try, basically what happens is environmental agencies come in and sue us to stop us, is what happens. So now look at the job creation per $1 million of investment. So these are the industries and the direct and indirect and induced jobs that come from just $1 million in investment. I'm not talking about government investment. I'm talking about entrepreneurial investment. Time. I got 5 minutes. Okay, put your seatbelts back on. Just you can see those. Reforestation, land, watershed restoration, direct 17 jobs. When you get to all the way down, just look at the different increase in the workforce it would have. Now this doesn't happen in the first year. It takes time. So I'm going to jump through a bunch of these. There's a $2 million investment in mills. It was hundreds of millions of dollars in a 10-year period. Okay, so I'm going to have to blow through some of this. Federal government loses money managing valuable natural resources on federal lands. State trust lands average $14 per dollar spent. The federal government, I said they lost. They average 73 cents per dollar spent for a net revenue. This was in 2013 when I did this. I've been doing these a long time. I suppose I should update my numbers. But back then, it was $1.9 billion in lost net revenue at the federal government. And the state governments that were involved in this particular study made $223 million. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating that we put the states in charge of all this land, but I guess what I'm advocating is that the state would have control of it, and then they would recognize the revenues that come from current BLM lands, current Forest Service lands, if they were responsibly mined and responsibly grazed and responsibly logged. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. Now, I'm going to have to stop there. I can take this presentation to wherever you are if you want the whole thing, if you want to drink the whole fire hydrant water from fire hydrant. Someone asked me, they said, what's it like being a rep down there? It's like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. I said, yeah, but the water's not potable. So I guess I'll just close in a very unceremonious way. I'm done.
All right.
Let me give you this back.
Josh, we have our own IFS policy director,
Nicholas Kleinworth. So, Cornel, if you'd like to stay up here and answer Q&A along with Nicholas. Nicholas is the expert on federal dollars. So, I'll have you guys switch in between. And then anyone who has questions, we have a microphone here. So I'll come up to the front here.
I'm a retired MD. I was a falconer for 50 years, so I like birds. What about geoengineering? These environmental groups that sue, they're not paying attention to the U.S. Air Force spraying chemicals up in the air. It's scientifically proved 80% of our birds are gone, 90% of our insects are gone. And I know some legislatures here are concerned about geoengineering. Chemtrails, I think, is a good word. And we're not going to have an Earth if we don't stop something like that. So, and that affects our lands. Are you familiar with geoengineering?
I'm somewhat familiar with it, not as familiar as I should be. Oh, no, I'm up on the platform, yeah.
Oh, weather warfare.
Okay, stand in front of the microphone. What a brilliant idea. So I'm not as familiar with geoengineering as I need to be. I know that there's some spray that's normal and some spray that isn't. It's coming to the right conclusions about the spray that's being used to geoengineer and rightly dividing that and determining what we can do with legislation. Now, I think there's something coming up through the system right now. There are two bills coming up through. I haven't seen them yet, but when I do see them, I'm going to give them a careful look. That's all I can tell you right now until I see the bills. And that's not just until I see the language, I don't. It's really, until I see the language, I need to know. Yeah, it's a political problem. It's a health problem, though, as well.
Hi, Representative Rasor.
Yes, sir.
Fred Birnbaum, Idaho Freedom Foundation. I want to ask you about, this is I've seen the presentation, and actually I recognize a lot of this data, and I think you're spot on, especially about the disclaiming the lands that we never gave them up. One of the frustrations that you must have and others have, which is, what is the process for getting them back? Because Utah sort of tried. They had a lawsuit that they were going to pursue, was dismissed. What, in your view, is the appropriate process at this point? So I think you've made the case in terms of the economics and the sovereignty, but it seems like, at least in the 10 or so years I've been involved, we haven't gotten traction. What would be the breakthrough from your perspective?
So I don't have a clear path at this point, but down here, I understand there are a couple of people that I'm going to connect up with. One of them is Dar and Darmoon, and another is Ron Nielsen. I want to make some connections there and start looking at potential legislation. It should be simple. It should be simple as a resolution from the state and a concurrent resolution from the House and from the Senate, and it should be us instructing the federal government to extinguish the title on the lands that need to have the title extinguished on, and return the land to us. But lawyers have made it so complicated that we have the passage of the Northwest Ordinance and a number of other pieces of legislation that have happened in the last 200 plus years. We're going to have to navigate our way through them. And my reading of Mr. Nielsen's documents indicates to me that he may have some good insight there. Am I correct, Dorothy? Yeah. So I don't have a good answer for that right now, Fred. I'm just pointing out the disparity and the disingenuousness of the federal government over the last 2 centuries about this issue. And I'm trying to make people aware of it so that we can create a kind of a groundswell of understanding so that when we start bringing this stuff forward, it makes sense. There's always the fear, well, you'll sell it all off to your environment, your corporate friends. Newsflash, I don't have any corporate friends. But even if I did, that's the founders intended for the land to be in the hands of people. They intended that. But at the very least, it needs to be controlled by the states within which it resides. The United States has become the envy of the world primarily because of our commitment to protecting property rights for the individual. Well, it's the same way with states. We need to protect the property rights of the states. So, no, I don't have a clear path forward. I don't have an RS in mind, but I'm going to be working on that. I did learn a little bit about how much reading I'm going to be doing down here, and I've only had time to work on 4 bills. So, but I will get better at that if I'm allowed to stay.
Oh, this is just for streaming. So.
Yeah, regarding the first speaker, why don't we just privatize the school system and have a competition against the federal government that would eliminate our main problem? I mean, if you're a president of the United States, there's 2 things you do to get our culture back and our nation back. Have a competitive currency against the Federal Reserve notes, and have a competing currency, have a competing education system, a private, unregulated system, a market system, strange word to the government, that would eliminate both problems. So I think that's a rather simple solution that nobody wants to do. Secondly, you guys are proposing on all this land issue. I mean, the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto are alive and well in the United States. The main thrust is the elimination of private property, and that's what we have here. You want to transfer it from the federal government to the state. Well, that's an improvement, but that's not the solution. The solution is to let markets run everything instead of central planning. So eliminate government and run everything by markets, essentially. Anarcho-capitalism like Malay and Argentina.
We could use him as an example. I don't think that was a question. I think I was just being instructed. That's okay. That's what you're here for, to instruct your representatives.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you. I agree with him as far as that goes. I was going to ask about the Water Resources Department, the executive director, Weaver, they shut down the water resources over in, so that's a state, right? Unelected state. I was official, if you want to call them that. So how do you detach from that? You know,
So-
if it is a state, if it's run by the state, you've got state agencies that shut down things just as well.
Yeah, at the
And
state,
which I'm for what you're doing. But
at the state level, we try to do the very same thing. Actually, Idaho has been doing away with regulation, not as fast as I would like to see it, but faster than most states. And that is something that just has to come with time. Unfortunately, these things got to where they are over the last, how long has Idaho been a state? 135 years. So we need to be moving in that direction, deregulating the control of things and putting the responsibility for those kinds of things that this agency did back in the hands of the legislature, the elected people, so that when the person does it, then screws up, you can fire them. You can get rid of them. You can unelect them. So that's part of the plan. That's part of what I'm trying to work for here. What I've discovered is I've got to make friends in the things that I want to do. And so maybe I'll get your contact information and I'll call on you to help me out. Doesn't mean I'm chicken, just means I've learned a lot in 68 years. The reason my hair is receding is when you hit enough brick walls, eventually the hair follicles go, okay, we're done.
This is an issue I've been working on for about 30 years, is a federal government managing state-controlled land. I own a patented mine in northern Idaho. I'm also president of Moose Creek Mining District. Okay, that land, my property, is an LLC. I run it as a business. I pay state taxes close to $2,000 a year. At this point, I can almost not get to my land because of the regulations of the Forest Service. The Forest Service is trying to screed everybody out of there to the point that they have got over 120 mines invalidated. Now, recreational mining, they call it, or people with unpatented claims, bring in a lot of money to the state of Idaho. I did pretty good until the Forest Service pretty well shut me off. It takes 5 hours because of the neglect of the road to get from Pierce, Idaho to my mine in 60 miles because of the roads are so bad. The Forest Service has lost numerous of their own vehicles because they don't see each other and they have head-on collisions, to the point one documented just not long ago, the road is so rough, 1st November, that a wrecker responding to an accident bounced off the road, fell on its side in the Oro Grande Creek, and laid there for 20 hours before they get it out. Now, I, as a miner, or any other miner, you have to pull your dredge out of the creek to pour maybe a quart of fuel into there. How much fuel did that truck dump in the river while it's laying on its side? Forest Service didn't say anything. The Forest Service doesn't have their road crews go out and work on that road except for 2 times a year they run a grader down there. But my main issue is this. I'm paying state taxes and I can't get any representation to try to help me fight to get my business back. And the county of Clearwater charges me the exact same rate on my taxes as I'm charged on my house in Boise. And this cabin I can get to in Boise, I built with a chainsaw, and I can only get there 2 to 3 months out of the year under good conditions. Last year I was only able to get there 2 weeks. So who do I consult to help me?
Have you talked with your district representatives at all?
I have.
Okay.
And my district representative, you might as well pound sand in the rat hole. But if there are representatives up there. Now, one of the issues of the 120 mines that were invalidated, those people live outside of the state. So they can't contact Senator Rich or they can't Senator Crapo for their help. If they live in Montana, they're wasting their time, or Washington, they're wasting their time to write to any of their representatives.
Gail, right?
Pardon me?
Gail, is your name?
Dale, yes.
Can I get your contact information?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
find-
I want to give you a packet of info for
Okay.
you to look over. This is as brief as I know how to make it to try to get this going. But I was petitioned or asked by a bunch of members up there. In 4 hours, I got 112 names on a petition to try to force the Forest Service to do that. I went to a meeting. The road manager jumped up and pretty much cussed me out, told me I was an idiot, didn't know what I was talking about. So this is the kind of thing that says, I'm not the guy that did that petition. I'm not the guy that's doing it. I'm just the messenger. In 4 hours, 115 people I talked to, 112 of them signed the petition. How many could I get if I had more time and talked to more people?
Well, I'll get a copy of your information and
I would be so happy.
see who I can contact for you.
All right, we have time for one more question. Okay, I think we are good. Please give it up one more time for Representative Cornel Rasor. All right, so that concludes today's Capitol Clarity. Please join us next Thursday at noon to hear from the Liberty Council representing Major David Worley, a National Guardsman who was removed from command by our own governor, all because he chose to express a First Amendment and traditional Christian values. Thank you very much.